In the last video, we made a corset pattern to your own measurements. In this video, we're going to make the corset. There are hundreds of ways to construct a corset, and many people hold that one of them is the correct way. They are entitled to that opinion. This video is about what I do, sometimes. Often I just make stuff up and try different ways. If it works to my satisfaction, it's correct. That's how I roll. The pattern that you made from the last video, or any pattern you like, but obviously I can't vouch for my techniques being compatible with any old pattern. Some coutil or similar strong, unstretchy fabric. Nothing's better than coutil, but stiff denim or canvas could work. Some outer fabric, which can be anything, but if you're new, maybe choose something easy to work with. So no stretch, not too flimsy or too thick, not too slippery or satiny, and no velvet. What are you, a masochist? 8 or more corset bones to provide the vertical structure. These should be about 20 centimeters long, or as tall as the distance from your top to bottom line in the video from last time. Bone channel, which you can buy either by the meter or the roll, or you can make it from strips of coutil, but it's a faff. A busk closure, which is the traditional corset front closure, available in a range of lengths. Use 20 centimeters if you're following my first video in the series, or throw out the rule book and do something crazy after watching the third video in the series. Tailor's chalk, or similar. A chalk clicky pencil is life-changingly great for this, but anything will do if it marks accurately. An awl, but you can improvise with a few sizes of knitting needle if you don't have an awl. Eyelets and the means to attach them. See my video about that. Or eyelet tape if you're lazy, like I sometimes am. But leave extra space in your lacing gap if you're going to do that. Bootlace or ribbon or cord or whatever lacing material you want, as long as it's strong. You're going to need several meters depending on your lacing gap and the number of eyelets that you use. You need to cut 2 of each piece out of coutil and 2 of each piece out of the outer fabric. Either cut it double with the fabric folded along the grain, or if you're going to cut each piece singly, make sure that you turn the pattern over halfway through so that you don't accidentally make all left sides. And place the pattern so the grain goes up and down each piece. Keep track of which piece is which. Either write it on the wrong side or whatever you like, but they are easy to accidentally turn over or flip upside down, and that will screw up your whole project, so take some kind of precaution. Even if you don't normally mark on your pieces, I recommend some basic chalk marks on the coutil's wrong side, partly just because coutil takes chalk so cooperatively. I also keep all my pieces laid out on the table in real orientation throughout the project so as not to overtax my working memory. Take up your 4 pieces from one side of the coutil and pin or just sew them together in whichever order you please, being careful to keep them the right way up and the right way out. Then do the same with the other 4 pieces of coutil. Then do the same with the outer fabric, remembering that if the coutil, which is lining, is right side down, then these pieces are right side up. Don't worry if that's confusing, just plow on. So you've got 4 halves, as it were. You can press the seams open now and match up the coutil and the outer to make sure that you haven't made all lefts. If you haven't been cavalier with your seam allowance and you haven't accidentally turned any pieces upside down, your vertical seams should all line up as you do this. If they're a tiny bit off, you can fudge it slightly and maybe resolve to be less cavalier with your seam allowance in future. If they really don't line up, something's gone wrong and you're going to have to pause and figure out what. Good luck. Bone channels are basically a tube of very dense, strong fabric, just big enough to slip a bone through, so it's held in place and can't slip around. I'm using prefab bone channel and I recommend it highly, but you can improvise something similar out of coutil or whatever you're using. It just needs to be really strong, especially at the ends, and to form a secure tube just bigger than the bones. Cut the bone channels into lengths about 5 centimeters longer than your bones. You're going to sew them to the wrong side of the coutil, and I usually put one centered on each of the seams and one right up against the center back seam. Stick any additional ones in that you fancy. Fold over the top couple of centimeters of bone channel and sew it on, starting slightly more than seam allowance down from the top edge, making sure that you don't accidentally sew the channel too narrow for the bones to fit through. Stop stitching about 2 centimeters from the bottom seam line so that you'll have room to turn under the bottom and stitch it down after the bone is inserted. Sew all the bone channels on in the same way, leaving all the bottom edges unfinished for now. From here, there are a number of ways you can go about this. I'm going to give you a straightforward order of steps that will work, but you can and should riff off that in any way that you fancy once you've got your head around it. Ultimately, you're going to sew 3 sides of this weird compound curved rectangle, leaving just the bottom open, so that you can clip the corners, bag it out, insert the bones, and close the bottom seam last. But before you do that, you need to know how the busk is going to interact with the fabric encasing it. A busk is a 2-piece stiff closure mechanism designed to provide an uncrumpleable, easy front closure the full length of the front of the garment. If you've never sewn in a busk before, this can be daunting. Be brave. The piece with the eye tabs goes on the right as you wear the corset. and the nubbin sticky uppy things go on the left. Most busks have two little connector thingies closer together than the rest of them, and those go at the bottom. Might be wise to mark the top of both pieces with a dot of permanent marker or similar. Figure out which is the left and which is the right of your corset pieces, remembering while you hold it up to yourself that the coutil will be right side in and the outer will be right side out. Again, don't worry if that's confusing, you will figure it out as you go along. Lay the coutil bit of the right side of the corset wrong side up on a table. Lay the busk on the center front line, the right way up, with the sticky outy tabs overlaying the center front seam line. Mark the top and bottom of the busk tabs as accurately as possible with your chalk, and also mark the top and bottom of the busk. Pin the front edge of the coutil and the outer together if you're a pinning sort of person, and you need to sew the straight line of the center front seam, but leaving gaps for the eyes to fit through. So you're sewing all the bits between the tabs. This is fiddly, sorry, but do proper backstitching at each end. The point is that it's got to be really, really sturdy. At the bottom of the busk, you can continue the seam around the corner a bit, leaving a little bit of extra room because when you turn it inside out, it can get a little bit crowded in there. Sew all the way along the top edge at this point, just skimming the folded over tops of each bone channel. At the corners, make sure you're turning a corner and not sewing over into your seam allowance. That would make it harder to clip it and invert it without leaving a weak point. Sew the center back seam while you're in the flow. So you've sewn round 3 sides of this piece, leaving holes for the busk tabs. It's time to clip the corners carefully without cutting your actual stitching. Grade the seam allowance if you're into that, and turn it right side out. You can give it a quick press at this point and admire how beautiful it looks. And now comes the fiddly work of feeding all the eye tabs through the little holes from the inside of the now bagged out garment by feeding it tab by tab between the 2 layers of seam allowance and into the gaps. It'll fight you, but you'll win in the end. Have patience, and maybe a cup of tea and a biscuit. When you get it in, pin it in so that it can't slip out again, and then just stitch it in place, either by machine or with just a few subtle hand stitches or with some decorative stitches if that's your bag. The good news is the sewing of the left side is a lot easier. Mark the top and bottom of the busk and just sew the 3 sides of the rectangle. You don't need to leave any gaps. Clip it, trim it, and bag it out as before. The bad news is the fitting of the nubbin side of the busk is actually, if anything, fiddlier than the tab side. Push the nubbin side of the busk right up against the center front seam so that the only thing wrong is that the nubbins are not sticking through the fabric. Take the other side of the busk and press it down over the nubbins so that they're trying to stick up through the eyes. Mark the fabric sticking through with chalk, and now take the busk out and use the awl to poke a hole in the first marked spot. The idea here is to create a hole big enough to push the nubbin through without actually breaking any of the threads, which would cause the fabric to fray. If you can make a hole by just moving the fibers aside, they can settle back into place around the base of the nubbin and end up really, really tidy. But getting each nubbin through its hole does take a lot of fiddling and can be frustrating. Another cup of tea and a biscuit? Anyway, keep messing with it and eventually you'll get every nubbin through its hole without any ripped fabric. Hopefully. It probably won't fall out now, but pin it and stitch it just like you did the other side, just in case. It's now time to slip all the bones in from the bottom, the open side of the corset. If you've used prefab bone channel, make sure the bone goes inside the tube rather than between the tube and the coutil. Now you can turn under the spare bit of bone channel, trim it a bit shorter if you need to, and stitch the last bit down carefully with a zip foot to get close enough. And when I say carefully, I mean like maybe walk the machine with your hand and not the foot pedal carefully, because if a sewing machine needle and a steel bone meet in anger, the bone wins every time. You can finish the bottom edge in any way you fancy. If I'm lazy or in a hurry, I fold the seam allowance up and in and top stitch the edge very carefully. See note about bones and sewing machine needles. If I want it not to have any top stitching, I do the folding in, but then I hand slip stitch it along the bottom edge. Anything that closes it up is fine, and hell, if you want to leave it flapping open with a raw edge, you are your own designer, and if you like it, it's right. Eyelets are their own whole skill and could potentially take longer than the rest of this project put together. There are many ways to do this, and they all have their merits. I've made a video about some of the options. Have a watch of that. In the end, for me, a foot-powered eyelet press wins hands down. Hands free? You can do whatever you have the supplies and equipment for, but first you will need to mark a series of dots on your center back edge far enough in to miss the bone next to the seam. You can use any spacing you want, although I always err on the side of too many rather than too few. The easiest way to do this is to mark the top and bottom hole in a sensible place, and then cut a strip of paper that length, fold it in half a bunch of times, and then lay it out and mark next to the fold lines. But there are lots of legitimate ways, just make it up if you like. You can roughly calculate how much lacing length you're going to need by finding the distance between the eyelets. So that's intended lacing gap plus a bit, let's call it 10 centimeters, and multiplying that by the total number of eyelets. Let's call it a hypothetical 18. So we're at 180 centimeters plus, I don't know, a meter each side for unlacing purposes. So round up to 4 meters in our imaginary case. You can use continuous length boot or shoelaces available from shoemaking or corsetry websites. Ribbon, jute, garden twine, fancy cord, baling twine, anything you want. But obviously you need a continuous length of whatever it is, and it wants to be quite tough to stand up to a fair amount of pulling and dragging through the eyelets. Laces are usually tipped with aglets to make them easier to thread through the eyelets. If your chosen lace is not already tipped, there are loads of options, from heat shrink plastic sleeve to metal squeezy grippy ones, to thread whipping and various dippable liquid products that set hard. Search aglets on the internet and the internet will provide. You can lace from top to bottom, from bottom to top, or you can lace to the middle like the cool kids, which has the advantage of being easier to tighten by yourself, you know, in case your lady's maid is busy that day. There are tons of tips and tricks I've left out for the sake of my trademark brevity. You'll figure a lot of them out for yourself as you go along. Generally, my attitude is that if it works, it's right. And remember that the first time you make anything, it's less about the product and more about the learning. So congratulations if you just made one. Good luck if you're just about to start making one. And if you're sitting there on the fence, go on, what's to lose? If you screw it all up, just try again after you've got over it, and the second time will go better. By the third time, you'll be an expert, and a very well-dressed one. Send pictures. See you next time for fun variations on this model.